The silver blade pressed against her throat was cold enough to burn. Morgan stood perfectly still as the hooded figures encircled her, their faces hidden beneath ceremonial masks carved to resemble wolves with human eyes. One step forward, the apparent leader, his weapon gleaming with an unnatural light. "Abomination," he whispered, voice thick with disgust. "Your blood violates the natural order." Morgan looked beyond the circle to the Montana night sky, where the crescent moon hung like a silent witness. They thought they had her cornered, these purists, with their silver weapons and their hatred. What they didn't understand was that after 8 years of isolation, death held little fear for her. It was insignificance that terrified her most. As the leader lunged, Morgan moved with a calm that surprised even herself. Her palm slid across the blade, opening a clean line across her skin. But what welled forth wasn't the crimson of normal wolf blood. It shone silver in the moonlight, liquid mercury that dripped between her fingers like living metal. With a flick of her wrist, she sent droplets arcing toward her attackers. Where they landed, the men screamed, not from pain, but from revelation. The silver blood didn't kill them as legend foretold. Instead, it revealed truth, burning away the masks of purity they wore, exposing the mixed heritage they had denied for generations. The leader staggered backwards, staring at his hands as fur began to sprout in patterns that spoke of bloodlines far from pure. "What have you done to me?" he gasped. Morgan watched them flee into the darkness, her silver blood still dripping onto the forest floor where it glowed with an inner light. She hadn't always been this person, this creature who could wield her curse as a weapon. Once she had been something far more tragic, a frightened child who believed herself a mistake. "I was once the outcast, the weakest Omega," she thought as she bound her wounded palm with a strip of cloth, until the Alpha King saw what no one else could. The question that had haunted her for 20 years echoed in her mind. What happens when the outcast becomes the most powerful person in the room? The answer had cost her everything. And it had begun, as most tragedy does, with blood. The Silver Oak Pack territory sprawled across the northern reaches of Montana, where ancient pine forests climbed the foothills of mountains so old they had no names in human tongues. For centuries, wolf shifters had claimed this land, living by codes and hierarchies as old as the wilderness itself. Alphas led with strength and dominance. Betas served with loyalty and intelligence. Omegas nurtured with compassion and healing. For 12 years, Morgan had believed she understood her place in this hierarchy. The daughter of Beta Samuel and his mate Catherine, she was quiet but bright, unremarkable but content. Her younger brother Ethan followed her everywhere, claiming she was magic because she could find wild raspberries where others saw only thorns. Then came her first shift ceremony, when all children of the pack gathered beneath the summer moon to reveal their wolf forms for the first time. Morgan remembered the excitement, the pride in her parents' eyes as they led her to the ceremonial circle where Elder Thomas waited with the sacred knife. "Show us who you are, child," the elder said, taking her small hand in his weathered one. The ceremonial blade glinted as it sliced across her palm, shallow enough to heal quickly but deep enough for blood to flow. The moment her blood touched the stone altar, silence fell over the gathering. Instead of crimson vitality, what poured from Morgan's veins was liquid silver, shimmering with an inner light that reflected the moon overhead. "Mercury blood," Elder Thomas whispered, backing away. The words rippled through the crowd, becoming a tide of fear. Moon touched. Her mother's scream was the first sound to break the silence, a wounded animal noise that Morgan would hear in nightmares for years to come. Her father stood frozen, his face emptied of all emotion except shock. Only Ethan remained unchanged, his 8-year-old face confused but unafraid as he tried to approach his sister. Samuel grabbed him roughly by the arm, yanking him away. "Don't touch her," he hissed. "Her blood kills." And just like that, Morgan ceased to be a daughter, a sister, a pack member. She became a curse, a mistake, a thing to be contained rather than loved. The cottage they built for her stood at the very edge of pack territory, far enough from the main village that no one would accidentally encounter her. It was small but sturdy, with thick walls to keep out the Montana winters, and a garden plot where she could grow her own food. Everything designed so she would need minimal contact with others. For the first year, her mother would leave supplies at a designated spot 50 yards from the cottage, never approaching close enough for Morgan to see her face. After that, the task was delegated to younger pack members as a test of courage. They would drop the supplies and run their fear scenting the air long after they disappeared into the trees. Morgan was 14 when Victor Hayes first knocked on her door. He stood on her porch like he belonged there, a tall man with steel gray hair and eyes that had seen too much to be frightened by a child with strange blood. He wore the weathered look of someone who had earned every wrinkle through hard living, his 70-year carried with the quiet dignity of a soldier who had survived battles that broke younger men. "Your garden needs work," he said by way of greeting, holding out a burlap sack that smelled of rich soil and green things. "Brought you some seedlings. Tomatoes do well in this soil." Morgan stared at him from behind the barely opened door. "You shouldn't be here. My blood." "I know all about your blood, child," Victor said, setting the bag down at a respectful distance. "I've survived Normandy Beach, 2 wars after that, and 50 years as a wolf in a human world. If I die from helping a girl plant tomatoes, then I suppose that's just fine." He became her first friend, though neither of them used that word. Victor had been the pack's record keeper before retiring, and he brought her books from his personal collection. Histories of wolf packs dating back centuries, linguistic texts on ancient wolf languages, scientific journals documenting anomalies in shifter biology. "Knowledge is the weapon they can never take from you," he told her, as he taught her to read the old languages. "Strength fades, beauty dies, but what you know becomes part of you." Under his guidance, Morgan learned to survive her isolation by filling it with knowledge. She taught herself 7 languages, memorized the lineages of every major wolf pack in North America, and studied the properties of her own blood through careful experimentation. She discovered that in small amounts, her blood could preserve organic material indefinitely. Mixed with ink, it created text that would never fade. Applied to wounds, it would burn like acid through normal wolves, but somehow Victor could touch it without harm. "Some of us are just built different," he would say with a wink when she questioned him about it. He never elaborated, and she eventually stopped asking. By her 20th birthday, Morgan had made a sort of peace with her existence. She transcribed ancient texts for the pack archives, her silver blood ink ensuring the words would last for generations. The pack never acknowledged where the special ink came from, but they valued the work enough to ensure she had what she needed to survive. It was Victor who first brought news of the disappearing Omegas. "3 packs have lost members in the past month," he said, as they sat on her porch watching the summer sunset paint the Montana sky in shades of fire. "All Omegas, all vanished without a trace." Morgan poured him another cup of tea, careful not to let her fingers brush his. Even with Victor, she maintained strict boundaries. "Rogues?" she asked. Victor's weathered face creased in a frown. "The packs think it's something worse. The Alpha King." Morgan had heard whispers of Alaric Blackwood, the Alpha who ruled the Black Mountain territory to the north. Rumors painted him as a monster in wolf form, a killer who collected tribute from lesser packs and delighted in blood sport. "They say he hunts on full moon nights." Victor continued, his voice dropping to a near whisper. "Not as a normal wolf, but as something else. The beast of Black Mountains, they call him. Some say he was cursed by a witch whose daughter he rejected. Others say he made a deal with dark forces for power." Morgan watched shadows lengthen across her small garden. "Why would he take Omegas? They're not exactly known for fighting skills." Victor's eyes sharp despite his age fixed on her. "There's a story," he said slowly, "an old one, about an alpha cursed to become a monster unless he could find the one whose blood could tame the beast within." He paused. "Some say he's searching for someone special, someone whose blood carries moonlight instead of life." The implication hung between them, unspoken but clear. Morgan felt cold despite the summer warmth. "It's just a story," she said finally. Victor nodded, but his expression remained grave. "Let's hope it stays that way." But stories have a way of becoming reality, especially in a world where humans transform into wolves and some bleed silver instead of red. 3 weeks later, Beta Samuel arrived at her cottage for the first time in 8 years. He stood at the edge of her garden, refusing to come closer, his face a mask of conflicted emotion. "The Alpha King's emissary came yesterday," he said without preamble. "He demands tribute from every pack in the region. 1 Omega delivered to Black Mountain before the next full moon." Morgan felt the world tilt beneath her feet. She steadied herself against the doorframe. "And the pack chose me." It wasn't a question, but Samuel answered anyway. "The Alpha Council voted unanimously. You'll leave tomorrow at dawn." Of course they had chosen her. Who better to sacrifice than the one they had already discarded, the cursed one whose blood could kill with a touch? the mistake they had been trying to correct for 8 years. "I see," Morgan said, surprising herself with the steadiness of her voice. Samuel shifted uncomfortably. For a moment, she thought she saw something like regret flicker across his features. "Morgan, He stopped, then started again. "I'm sorry it has to be you, but not sorry enough to offer himself instead. Not sorry enough to fight for his daughter." After he left, Morgan sat alone in her small cottage, surrounded by the books and knowledge that had been her only companions besides Victor. She should feel afraid, she thought. She was being sent to a monster, a death sentence disguised as tribute. Yet all she felt was a strange calm, as if some part of her had been waiting for this moment. She packed methodically. Clothing, a few precious books, the journal where she recorded her observations about her blood, small vials of silver blood ink she had prepared for experiments. When dawn came, she was ready, standing at the edge of her garden with a single bag at her feet. Victor arrived before the pack guards his old truck rumbling up the dirt path that led to her cottage. He looked like he hadn't slept, his usually kempt appearance disheveled. "I tried to stop them," he said as soon as he stepped from the vehicle. "Went to the Alpha himself, argued your case." "It wouldn't have mattered," Morgan said gently. Victor's shoulders slumped. "No, I suppose not." He reached into his jacket and withdrew a small leather-bound book, its cover worn with age. "Take this. It's a text on blood magic from the old country. My grandfather brought it when our family came to America. It might help you understand your gift." "My curse," Morgan corrected. Victor shook his head, placing the book in her hands. "A curse is just a gift that no one has figured out how to use yet. Remember that." The transport cage they brought for her was an insult, but not a surprise. 8 feet long, 4 feet wide, constructed of silver-reinforced steel, it was designed to contain rogue wolves during transport. Morgan stepped inside without protest, ignoring the nervous glances of the guards who secured the door with trembling hands. As the cage was loaded onto a flatbed truck, Morgan caught sight of her brother Ethan, watching from the tree line, his face stricken. She raised her hand in a small wave. After a moment's hesitation, he returned the gesture before disappearing into the forest. The journey north took 3 days. Morgan spent the time studying Victor's book, memorizing passages about blood bonds and ancient rituals. She observed the guards, noting their routines, the shifts in their attention. She cataloged escape routes, though she made no attempt to flee. Where would she go? She had no pack, no allies except an old man who had already risked too much for her. Besides, something inside her was curious. What kind of alpha collected omegas? Like rare objects. What was he searching for that made him take such risks? If the rumors were true, if he was looking for someone with mercury blood, then perhaps this was not a death sentence, but a different kind of fate altogether. They were crossing into Black Mountain territory when the truck suddenly braked. Morgan braced herself against the cage bars as the vehicle lurched to a halt. Through the slats, she saw the guards rush toward another transport cage on a second truck. Inside was a young woman with honey blonde hair, desperately trying to pry open the locked door. "Please," the woman begged as guards surrounded her cage. "I have children, 2 little girls. They need their mother." The guard captain, a hard-faced beta named Reynolds, shook his head. "Should have thought of that before you tried to escape Lily. The king doesn't tolerate runners." Morgan watched as they secured Lily's cage with additional locks. The woman caught her gaze, desperation giving way to resignation. "You're the one with the silver blood," Lily whispered when the guards returned to their positions. "I've heard stories." "Don't believe everything you hear," Morgan replied softly. Lily's laugh held no humor. "They say you kill with a touch, that your blood is poison to our kind." Morgan studied the other woman, seeing the fear beneath her bravado. "And yet here we both are, equally caged." Something passed between them then, a recognition. Whatever they had been in their former lives, whatever separated them in the hierarchy of wolf society, here they were the same. Tribute, sacrifice, disposable. The landscape changed as they traveled deeper into Black Mountain territory. The lush pine forests of Montana gave way to stark rocky terrain, jagged peaks reaching toward a sky that seemed darker somehow, as if the mountains themselves devoured the light. The temperature dropped despite the summer season, and Morgan pulled her jacket tighter around her shoulders. By late afternoon of the 3rd day, their destination came into view. Black Mountain Fortress rose from the mountainside, like it had been carved from the living rock, which in fact it had. Obsidian walls gleamed with a dull luster towers stretching toward the sky like accusing fingers. No flags flew from those towers, no decorations softened the brutal architecture. It was a place built for power, not beauty. The trucks passed through massive gates into a courtyard where other vehicles were already parked. Morgan counted 4 additional transport cages, each containing a single occupant. 5 Omegas gathered from 5 packs. The tribute demanded by a king who ruled through fear. As guards approached her cage, Morgan steeled herself. Whatever awaited her inside those black walls, she would face it with the dignity that had sustained her through 8 years of isolation. She was a curse made flesh, perhaps. But she was also a woman who had survived being unmade. There was strength in that, even if no one else could see it. The guards opened her cage with caution, bordering on terror, keeping their distance as she stepped out. One pointed toward a side entrance with a silver-tipped spear. That way, move. Morgan walked with measured steps, aware of the other Omegas being similarly directed. Lily caught her eye briefly, a silent plea in her gaze. Morgan wished she had comfort to offer, but lies had never been her specialty. The corridors inside the fortress were surprisingly well-lit, torches burning in sconces along wall polished to a mirror shine. Their group was led to a circular chamber with a domed ceiling where they were instructed to wait. No chairs were provided, no water or food offered. They were not guests, but possessions expected to stand until their new owner decided their fate. The other Omegas clustered together, finding comfort in proximity. Morgan remained apart, knowing her presence would only add to their anxiety. She used the time to observe the chamber, noting the multiple exits, the way sound carried in the domed space, the position of the guards. "He's gonna kill us, isn't he?" One of the male Omegas whispered, voice trembling. "They say he makes Omegas fight to the death for his entertainment." "I heard he feeds them to his personal guard," another added. "Gets them hooked on Omega blood so they're more vicious." Morgan tuned out their fearful speculation, focusing instead on the subtle shift in the guard's posture. They had straightened eyes fixed on the main entrance. Someone was coming. The door swung open without a sound, revealing a man who could only be Logan, the infamous beta to the Alpha King. He was older than Morgan had expected, perhaps 55 or 60, with close-cropped salt and pepper hair and the watchful eyes of a career soldier. Scars marked his face and hands, telling stories of battles survived at great cost. "The king will see you now," Logan announced, his voice carrying the gravelly texture of someone who had inhaled too much smoke in his lifetime. "You will not speak unless spoken to. You will not approach the throne unless instructed. You will show proper respect or suffer the consequences." As they were ushered into the throne room, Morgan felt a strange electric tension in the air, as if the very atmosphere was charged with potential energy. The room itself was vast, carved from a single piece of obsidian, and polished until it reflected the torchlight like dark water. Deep gouges marred some of the walls, as if massive claws had raked across them in fury. And there, seated upon a throne that seemed carved from nightmares, waited Alaric Blackwood. Morgan's first thought was that rumors had failed to capture the full impact of the man. He was devastatingly beautiful in a way that felt dangerous, all sharp angles and controlled power. Silver white hair fell past his shoulders, an unusual color for a wolf who appeared to be in his 30s. His eyes were the pale blue of winter ice, and when they fixed on the group, Morgan felt the weight of a predator's assessment. He wore black, of course, fitted pants and a simple shirt, open at the throat to reveal a glimpse of a tattoo over his heart. No crown marked him as king. He needed none. Authority radiated from him like heat from a flame. "So," he said, his voice a low rumble that seemed to vibrate in the stones beneath their feet. "These are this season's offerings." He rose from the throne with liquid grace, moving down the line of tributes. Some whimpered. One female Omega actually fainted, caught by a guard before she hit the floor. When Alaric reached Morgan, he stopped, nostrils flaring slightly. "You smell of silver and sorrow," he murmured, circling her slowly. "Beta Samuel sent me his afflicted daughter." How predictable. Morgan kept her eyes fixed straight ahead, refusing to give him the satisfaction of her fear. He was close enough now that she could smell him, pine and iron, and something wild that made her Omega instincts scream contradictory commands. "Run, submit, fight, stay. Tell me, little curse," he continued, "do you know why I demand tributes? When Morgan didn't answer, his hand shot out, gripping her chin and forcing her to meet his gaze. The guards tensed, but Alaric showed no fear of her blood. The contact sent a shock through Morgan's system. No one had touched her in 80 years. No one could touch her without dying. Yet here was the Alpha King, his skin against hers, and nothing was happening. I asked you a question. His grip tightened slightly. Entertainment, I assume, Morgan managed through his grip. The mighty Alpha King grows bored and demands new toys. Alaric laughed, a sound like breaking glass. Entertainment? Yes, I suppose that's what they would think. He released her, wiping his hand on his leather pants as if she'd contaminated him, though they both knew the gesture was theater. Very well. Let me entertain you all with tonight's game. He gestured toward great doors at the far end of the throne room. They groaned open, revealing a circular chamber beyond, lit by hundreds of candles. My arena, Alaric announced, where we play a very simple game. Survive from sundown to sunrise, and I'll grant you a place in my household. Fail. He smiled, showing teeth too sharp for his human form. Well, failure has its own rewards. One Omega, the delicate male from the river packs, fell to his knees. Please, your majesty, we're not fighters. We're Omegas. We can't. Alaric moved so fast, Morgan barely saw it. One moment he stood by the arena entrance. The next he had the pleading Omega by the throat lifted off the ground. Can't, he snarled. Then you'll die. Natural selection at its finest. He dropped the Omega, who scrambled backward, gasping. But I'm not entirely without mercy. You may choose your opponent for the night. Another tribute, one of my warriors, or... His smile widened. Me. The other tributes erupted in panic. Some begged for the chance to fight each other, assuming another Omega would be the easiest opponent. Morgan remained silent, processing the situation. This wasn't simple cruelty. There was something calculated in those ice-blue eyes, something searching. He wasn't just looking for entertainment. He was looking for something specific. What about you, Mercury Blood? Alaric appeared in front of her again, with that unnatural speed. Who will you choose to dance with tonight? Morgan met his gaze steadily. The smart choice would be another Omega. The safe choice would be one of his warriors. But she'd spent 20 years making safe choices. And where had it gotten her? You, she said clearly. The throne room went silent. Even the guard stopped breathing. Alaric tilted his head, studying her with those predator eyes. Brave or stupid little curse? Curious, Morgan admitted. An Alpha King who plays games with tributes instead of simply killing them. Who speaks of entertainment but looks for something else. Who touches a poisonous Omega without fear. You're not what you pretend to be. Something flickered across his face. Surprise, perhaps, or recognition. Then the mask of cruel amusement slammed back into place. Midnight, he said softly. The arena. Come armed or unarmed, I care not. But come ready to show me what Samuel's mistake can do besides bleed silver. He turned to the guards. Take them to the tribute quarters. Feed them. Let them rest. Tonight we see who among them deserves to see another dawn. As they were herded out, Morgan caught a glimpse of Alaric ascending his throne again. For just a moment, when he thought no one was looking, she saw exhaustion seep into his features. His hand went to his chest, pressing against the tattoo beneath his shirt, and his face contorted with what looked like pain. Then he noticed her attention, and the moment shattered. The cruel smile returned, and he gave her a mocking salute. Whatever game the Alpha King was playing, Morgan was certain of one thing. The rules were not what they appeared to be. And perhaps, just perhaps, that might give her a chance not just to survive, but to understand the mystery of a king who collected cursed things as if searching for a mirror to his own darkness. The tribute quarters were Spartan but clean. A row of cells with basic amenities that spoke more of practicality than cruelty. Morgan sat alone on a narrow cot, feeling the minutes tick away toward midnight. The other Omegas huddled together in the common area, whispering frantically about strategies and alliances as if such things mattered in the game they'd been forced to play. Lily approached cautiously, keeping a respectful distance. Is it true? She asked, voice barely above a whisper. You chose to fight the king himself. Morgan nodded, thumbing through Victor's book on blood magic. She'd been searching for anything that might explain how Alaric could touch her without consequence. But the ancient text offered only cryptic references to those whose blood recognizes its counterpart. You're going to die. Lily's words carried no malice, only a resigned certainty. No one survives a night with him. The last Omega who tried, they found pieces for weeks. Morgan closed the book, meeting Lily's gaze. We're all touched by darkness in our own way, she replied. Perhaps his recognizes mine. Before Lily could respond, the door to the quarters swung open. Logan stood there, his scarred face unreadable. Time to go, Mercury blood. The king awaits. As Morgan rose to follow, Lily caught her sleeve. If by some miracle you survive, remember there are others of us, people with families, children. The unspoken request hung in the air between them. Morgan nodded once, a promise she wasn't sure she could keep, before following Logan into the torchlit corridor. The king has never chosen a female opponent before, Logan said as they walked, his voice neutral, but his eyes assessing. Especially not an Omega. Is that supposed to make me feel special? Morgan asked. The ghost of a smile touched Logan's scarred lips. Just an observation. He's been different since your arrival was announced. Agitated. Expectant. They descended a spiral staircase that seemed to bore directly into the mountain's heart. The air grew colder, carrying the scent of beeswax and something else. Something wild and primal that made the hair on Morgan's arm stand on end. He's waiting for something, Logan continued. Has been for years. Tributes come and go, but he keeps searching. The old beta paused at a massive iron door. Whatever happens in there tonight, remember this. He could have killed you already if that was his intent. With that cryptic statement, he pushed open the door, revealing the arena beyond. The arena at midnight was transformed from the candle-lit chamber Morgan had glimpsed earlier. The candles had been extinguished, replaced by an eerie blue-white glow emanating from crystals embedded in the walls. The weapons she had seen lining the walls remained, but now she could see they weren't ordinary steel. Each blade gleamed with the same unnatural light as the crystals, etched with runes that seemed to shift when she wasn't looking directly at them. Morgan stood in the center, wearing simple fighting leathers they'd provided. She'd chosen no weapon, no. What was the point? She'd never trained with any of them, and holding sharp objects when fighting an Alpha King seemed like a good way to end up stabbing herself. Alaric entered through the opposite door, and Morgan's breath caught. He'd stripped down to fitted black pants and nothing else, revealing a body that was a testament to violence survived. Scars crisscrossed his torso in patterns too deliberate to be random. But it was the tattoo over his heart that made her stare. A black sun being devoured by a silver moon, the ink seeming to pulse with its own life. No weapon, he asked, beginning to circle her. Disappointing. I hope for more creativity from someone who chose death so readily. I am my own weapon, Morgan replied, circling opposite him, maintaining distance. Alaric laughed again, that sound like shattered crystal. Yes, I suppose you are. He stopped studying her with those winter eyes. Tell me, when did you last touch someone without killing them? The question was so unexpected, Morgan almost stumbled. What? Never held your mother's hand, never embraced a friend, never felt the warmth of another's skin without it ending in screams. Each question was a dagger, finding gaps in armor she didn't know she wore. Why does it matter? She managed, steadying herself. Because I'm curious, he said, then moved. He was faster than any wolf Morgan had ever seen. She barely managed to dodge, feeling wind from his strike brush her cheek. But instead of following up, he danced back, studying her with that intense gaze. Interesting. You move like someone who spent their life watching others fight. He attacked again, a series of strikes that should have overwhelmed her. But Morgan had read every combat manual in Victor's collection, memorized every diagram. Her body might be untrained, but her mind knew the patterns. She slipped between his attacks, never quite where he expected. You're not fighting, he growled, increasing his speed. You said survive until sunrise. Morgan panted narrowly at avoiding his claws. Not defeat the Alpha King. He stopped so suddenly, Morgan nearly ran into him. Clever little curse, but survival isn't always about running. His next attack was different, calculated to corner her against the wall. Morgan had nowhere left to dodge. His hand closed around her throat, not tight enough to choke, but firm enough to hold. They both froze, waiting for her blood to do its work. Nothing happened. His skin didn't blister. He didn't convulse in agony. He just held her there, his face inches from hers, those ice-blue eyes boring into her soul. Impossible, she whispered. Is it? He leaned closer, his breath warm against her ear. Did you really think I'd challenge a Mercury Omega without knowing I could touch her? He released her and stepped back, flexing his unmarked hand. Your turn. My turn for what? To attack me, or did you think this would be entirely one-sided? Morgan stared at him, mind racing. He could touch her. No one could touch her. But he just had, and he was still standing still, smirking like he knew all her secrets. I don't know how to fight. Lie. He began circling again. You know exactly how to fight. You've been fighting your whole life. You just don't use claws. Something in his words ignited anger Morgan had buried for years. Fine. He wanted to see how she fought. She reached up and drew her nail across her palm, letting silver blood well up. His eyes tracked the movement, but he didn't retreat. Morgan flicked her hand, sending droplets flying toward him. Alaric didn't dodge. The blood hit his chest, and Morgan waited for screams for sizzling flesh. Instead, the drops rolled off him like mercury on glass, leaving no mark. My turn, he said softly, and then he shifted. But it wasn't like any shift Morgan had ever seen. Normal wolves transformed in seconds, their human shape flowing into wolf form like water. Alaric broke apart. His bones snapped audibly, reforming at impossible angles. His skin split and resealed. When it was over, what stood before Morgan wasn't quite wolf, wasn't quite man, but something caught between towering and bipedal, covered in white fur with those same ice-blue eyes. A dire wolf, the monsters of legend that hadn't walked the earth in 1,000 years. Morgan should have been terrified. Instead, she felt a strange kinship. They were both impossible things existing outside nature's laws. He stalked toward her, and she held her ground. Those massive claws could tear her in half, but they hadn't yet. This was still a test, still a game with rules she didn't understand. When he was close enough that Morgan could feel heat radiating from his transformed body, he spoke words distorted by his monstrous muzzle. Show me what else you can do, Silverblood. Show me why the moon cursed you with mercury veins. The moon... Morgan frowned. I don't understand. Then let me educate you. He grabbed her bleeding hand, pressing it against the tattoo over his heart. Feel. Power slammed into Morgan like a physical force. Images flooded her mind. A younger Alaric screaming as silver was poured into wounds carved into his chest. A woman with moon-white eyes speaking words in the old tongue. Decades of agony as his body learned to process what should have killed him. Morgan jerked back, gasping. You did this to yourself. To become strong enough to unite the pack, sacrifices were required. His form rippled, struggling between wolf and man. But every strength comes with a price. I gained immunity to silver, to wolfsbane, to every poison our kind fears. But I lost the ability to fully control my shifts. Under the full moon, I become something else. Understanding dawned on Morgan. That's why you need tributes. Not for entertainment, for protection from yourself. His wolf head tilted. Clever girl, but you're only half right. I don't need protection from myself. His form finally settled back into mostly human. I need someone who can survive me when I'm lost to the beast. Someone who might bring me back. The weight of what he was asking settled over Morgan like a shroud. He wasn't looking for victims. He was looking for an anchor. Why would I help the monster who kidnaps Omegas? Because he said, approaching slowly, you're as tired of being alone as I am. Because you've spent 20 years being feared for something you can't control. He was close enough to touch again. Because maybe, just maybe, two afflictions might cancel each other out. This time, when his hand reached for her face, Morgan didn't flinch. His fingers were gentle against her cheek, and she realized this was the first time anyone had touched her tenderly since she was 12 years old. The full moon is in 3 nights, he said. If you can survive that, then we'll discuss what comes next. Dawn came like a whispered promise, the crystals gradually dimming as natural light filtered through high windows. They'd spent the remaining hours in a strange dance. Him teaching her basic defense moves her, showing him the other properties of her blood she'd discovered over the years. It preserves, Morgan explained, letting a drop fall onto a withered rose from a wall vase. Within moments, the petals brightened, became faller, as if frozen at the moment of perfect bloom. Documents written with it never fade. Organic material treated with it resists decay. Alaric studied the restored rose with calculating eyes. What else? It burns through lies. Morgan pulled out a small vial she always carried, mixing a drop with regular ink. Write something false and the words will literally eat through the page. My pack used it for treaties, though they'd never admit it. Useful. He took the vial, examining the silver liquid within. Have you ever tried ingesting it yourself? Morgan stared at him. That would be suicide. Would it? You produce it naturally. Your body doesn't poison itself. The thought had never occurred to her. Her blood was death to others, so she'd assumed. But he was right. She lived with it, flowing through her veins every day. Tomorrow night, Alaric said, returning the vial, we test that theory, but first you need to understand what you're truly agreeing to. He led her from the arena through corridors Morgan hadn't seen before. The castle was a labyrinth of black stone and impossible architecture. They emerged onto a balcony suspended impossibly high above a chasm that yawned between mountain peaks. 3 nights from now, when the moon rises full, I will transform, Alaric said, gripping the railing. Not into the dire wolf you saw, but something worse. Something that exists only to hunt, to kill, to gorge itself on blood until the moon sets. I've tried everything. Chains break, cages crumble. Magical barriers mean nothing to that thing. How many have died? Every tribute who's tried. Dozens of my own guards. My own beta who believed his loyalty could reach the man inside the monster. His voice went hollow. I tore out his throat and painted the walls with his blood. Then why keep trying? He turned to Morgan, and for the first time she saw past the cruel king facade to the exhausted man beneath. Because the affliction is spreading. Each moon I stay transformed longer. Each time I range farther. Last month I woke up 3 territories away, surrounded by the remains of an entire patrol unit. Soon I won't come back at all. And you think I can stop that? I think you're the first person I've met who might survive long enough to try. He pulled something from his pocket, a collar of black metal, inscribed with runes that hurt to look at. This was crafted by the witch who cursed me. She said it would only work when I found someone whose nature opposed mine fundamentally. Monster and what? I don't know. That's what we need to find out. He held out the collar. Wear this for the next 3 nights. Let it taste your blood. Learn your essence. When the moon rises, we'll see if opposites truly attract or if they simply destroy each other more efficiently. Morgan took the collar, the metal cold against her skin. The moment it touched her mercury blood, the runes flared violet, then settled into a steady pulse that matched her heartbeat. It accepts you, Alaric breathed, something like hope flickering across his features. No one else has gotten that far. What happens if it works? Then you become my anchor, the one who holds my leash when the beast emerges. His smile was sharp and sad. Congratulations, little curse. You might have just volunteered for the most dangerous position in the kingdom. Morgan fastened the collar around her throat, feeling the weight of it like a promise. Better than dying forgotten in a cottage at the edge of nowhere. Is it? He moved closer, fingers ghosting over the collar. You could still run. I'd let you give you gold. Safe passage to the eastern territories where my reach doesn't extend. Alone but alive. Morgan thought of 20 years of isolation, of watching life happen around her, but never being part of it. I've been alive, she said. It's overrated. Something shifted in Alaric's expression, respect perhaps, or recognition. Then we prepare. 3 nights to teach you everything I know about surviving monsters. As he led her back through the impossible corridors, Morgan touched the collar at her throat. It pulsed with warmth now, as if her blood had awakened something sleeping within the metal. The next 2 days passed in a blur of preparation. By day, Morgan learned the castle's layout, memorizing escape routes she'd probably never use. Alaric showed her secret passages, hidden chambers, places where the castle's magic was strongest. Remember, he said, demonstrating a specific whistle pattern. The beast responds to sound differently than sight. High pitches cause pain. Low frequencies can sometimes calm it. By night, they experimented with Morgan's blood. She discovered she could control its toxicity to some degree. Diluted with water, it became merely caustic rather than fatal. Mixed with certain herbs, it could induce sleep rather than death. And when Morgan finally tremblingly placed a drop on her own tongue, she felt power surge through her like liquid lightning. Your eyes, Alaric said, watching intently. They're glowing. Morgan caught her reflection in a polished shield. Her normally dark eyes had turned silver, luminous as moonlight. The effect lasted only minutes, but while it did, she felt different, stronger, more aware. "We'll explore that more after the full moon," Alaric said. "If there is an after." The final night before the full moon, Morgan couldn't sleep. She wandered the castle, eventually finding herself in a tower room she hadn't seen before. Star charts covered the walls, tracking lunar cycles going back decades. Red marks indicated full moons, and beside each was a number. Deaths, Morgan realized with a cold certainty. She turned to find Alaric in the doorway, looking as sleepless as she felt. "Morbid reading," she commented. "Realistic accounting," he corrected. "The numbers stopped getting worse after the first few years. I learned to lock myself away better." He joined her at the charts. "But lately the locks don't hold. The beast is getting stronger. Or you're getting tired of fighting it." He looked at her sharply. "What makes you say that?" "Because I recognize the exhaustion. 20 years of fighting what you are, it wears you down. Is that what you were doing when you chose to fight me instead of another Omega?" Morgan considered the question honestly. "Maybe. Or maybe I was choosing to start being something else. To stop being the tragic Omega bleeding Mercury in her cottage and start being something that matters." "And what have you become?" Morgan touched the collar, feeling it pulse with her heartbeat. "I guess we'll find out tomorrow night." By day, the castle showed Morgan two faces. In the public spaces, the Great Hall, the throne room, the training grounds, she saw Alaric the Alpha King. He was magnificent in his cruelty, holding court with an iron fist that never trembled. Nobles cowered before him. Warriors competed viciously for his approval. Servants scattered like mice when he passed. "You're too soft on them," he'd drawl from his throne, watching a beta whip a servant who'd spilled wine. "In my grandfather's day, such clumsiness meant losing the offending hand." The court would laugh nervously, unsure if he was joking. Morgan stood in her designated place, not quite servant, not quite guest, wearing the collar that marked her as something other. They called her the King's Experiment, when they thought she couldn't hear, or sometimes more cruelly, the Silver Whore. But at night in the private wings where only she was permitted, Morgan met a different man entirely. "Hold still," Alaric murmured, carefully drawing her blood into crystal vials. They sat in his private study, surrounded by texts and languages Morgan was still learning to read. "Tell me if it hurts." "It doesn't," she said, watching him work with surprising gentleness. "Why the act?" "What act?" "The tyrant king, the monster who enjoys suffering." He sealed the vial, adding it to the dozens he'd already collected. "Who says it's an act?" But his hands were careful as he bandaged the small cut, and when he thought Morgan wasn't looking, she caught him wincing at the sounds of pain echoing from the training grounds below. "Power maintained through love is easily corrupted," he said finally. "Fear is cleaner, more reliable." "Lonelier," Morgan added. "Yes." He moved to his desk, pulling out a journal filled with notes in his sharp handwriting. "Your blood reacts differently to various stimuli. Mercury under moonlight becomes almost luminescent. Mixed with wolfsbane, it neutralizes the poison entirely. But this," he showed Morgan a page covered in diagrams. "This is what interests me most." "I don't read ancient chemistry," she admitted. "Your blood doesn't just preserve or poison," he explained. "It transforms. It takes the nature of what it touches and inverts it. Poison becomes cure. Decay becomes preservation. Death becomes life. Potentially." He set down the journal. "Tomorrow is the full moon. We need to test the collar's limits." He led Morgan to a chamber she hadn't seen before, circular and windowless, carved with protective runes. At its center sat a pool of water so still it looked like black glass. "Scrying pool," he explained, but modified. "Step in." The water was surprisingly warm, rising to Morgan's waist as she waded to the center. The collar at her throat began to pulse more rapidly. "Now," Alaric said, pulling out a vial of her blood, "we see what happens when curse meets curse." He poured the mercury blood into the pool. Immediately, the water began to glow silver, mixing with black to create something that looked like liquid starlight. The collar grew hot against Morgan's skin, and she gasped as power surged through her. Images flooded her mind, not her own memories, but Alaric's. She saw a young prince, proud and arrogant, spurning a woman who offered him her heart. Saw her transform into something ancient, in terrible moon-white eyes blazing with power. Felt the curse take hold, twisting his body into shapes that shouldn't exist. But there was more. Morgan saw Alaric after years of learning to control the curse. The battles fought to unite the fractured packs. The careful construction of his monster reputation to hide the worst monster within. And threaded through it all loneliness so profound, it made Morgan's own isolation look like gentle solitude. She surfaced from the visions, gasping, finding Alaric kneeling at the pool's edge, one hand extended toward her. "What did you see?" he asked urgently. "Everything," Morgan whispered. "The witch, the curse, the—" She stopped, realizing what else she'd seen. "You've been searching for me, not just someone with mercury blood. Me specifically." He helped her from the pool water, streaming from her clothes. "The witch spoke a prophecy after she cursed me. Only when the moon's mistake finds the sun's redemption will the beast know peace." I thought it was nonsense, until reports came of an Omega who bled liquid silver under the full moon of her first shift. "You've known about me for 8 years." "I've been searching for you for 8 years," he corrected quietly. "I couldn't risk other packs realizing your value. When Beta Samuel finally offered you as tribute, I nearly laughed at the irony. He threw away the very thing I'd tear apart kingdoms to possess." "Possess?" Morgan repeated the word, bitter on her tongue. Alaric's hand cupped her face, forcing her to meet his eyes. "Poor choice of words. You're not a thing to be owned, Morgan. You're the answer to a question that I've been screaming at the moon for 20 years. What if I'm not? What if the collar fails? Then I'll send you away before the moon rises and pray I don't find your corpse in the morning." His thumb traced her cheekbone. "But I don't think it will fail. Do you know why?" Morgan shook her head. "Because for the first time since the curse took hold, I can touch someone without my wolf trying to tear its way out. Even now I can barely feel him stirring." He pulled her closer. "You quiet him." "Maybe he recognizes a fellow monster," Morgan said, trying for lightness. "Maybe he recognizes home." Alaric countered and kissed her. It should have been impossible. 20 years of being untouchable, and here was the most dangerous man in the realm pressing his lips to hers with desperate gentleness. The collar pulsed between them, their afflictions singing in harmony, and for one perfect moment, neither of them was monster or mistake. They were just two people finding solace in shared darkness. When they broke apart, Alaric's eyes had shifted to wolf gold, but there was no violence in them, only wonder. "One more night," so he said. "One more night to prepare, and then we see if beauty can truly tame the beast." Morgan flinched. "Beauty?" He laughed, the sound free of its usual broken edges. "You're a poisonous Omega who speaks in riddles and bleeds liquid moonlight. If anything, you're a beast of a different kind." "Then maybe that's what it takes," Morgan said, touching the collar that bound them. "A beast to tame a beast." The final day dawned gray and oppressive. The castle itself seemed to sense what was coming. Corridors shifted more frequently. The lights flickered without cause. Even the bravest servants spoke in whispers. Morgan spent the morning in the library trying to distract herself with research. But every text about curses and transformations just reminded her of what was coming. "Finding some light reading?" Alaric asked, appearing in the doorway. "Looking for hope," Morgan admitted, closing a particularly grim account of a cursed alpha who had devoured his entire pack. "History suggests I should have taken your offer to run." Alaric sat beside her, close enough that their shoulders touched. "History didn't account for you. Because I'm special." The words came out more bitter than intended. "Because you're impossible," he corrected. "Mercury blood shouldn't exist. Omegas who survive their own poison shouldn't exist. Women who look at monsters and see wounded men shouldn't exist. Yet here you are. Maybe that's the problem. Maybe nature has limits for a reason." Alaric was quiet for a moment. "Do you want to leave? There's still time." Morgan turned to look at him, really look. Beneath the kingly bearing and the carefully controlled expression, she saw the truth. He was terrified, not of dying, not of remaining cursed, but of hurting her. "No," she said simply. "We do this together or not at all." Relief flickered across his features before he hit it. "Then we should make the most of our last day." They were descending to the main hall when a commotion below caught their attention. Logan was arguing with the guards who seemed unwilling to let someone pass. As they drew closer, Morgan saw a familiar figure beyond the guards, a tall, weathered man with steel-gray hair and eyes that had seen too much to be frightened. "Victor," she breathed, breaking into a run. The old soldier looked up at her, voice relief washing over his features. Morgan, thank the gods you're alive. Before she could reach him, Alaric's hand closed around her arm. You know this man? He asked, voice dangerously soft. He's my friend, Morgan said, meeting Alaric's suspicious gaze. The only one who didn't fear me. Please. After a long moment, Alaric nodded to the guards. Let him pass, but watch him. Victor approached cautiously, his eyes taking in the collar around Morgan's neck and her position beside the Alpha King. I came as soon as I realized what the pack had done, he said. Followed your scent trail for 3 days. You're either very brave or very foolish, old man, Alaric said. Few enter my territory uninvited and live to tell of it. Victor met the Alpha's gaze without flinching. I've lived too long to fear death, your majesty, but I've not lived long enough to abandon those I care for. Something like respect flickered in Alaric's eyes. Logan, see that our guest is given the quarters and food. He turned to Morgan. I have matters to attend to. We'll continue our preparations at sunset. When Alaric had gone, Victor embraced Morgan, unconcerned about her lethal blood. I should have stopped them, he said. I tried, but the council was unanimous. Morgan led him to a quiet alcove where they could speak privately. It's all right, things are complicated. But I'm not a prisoner, not exactly. Victor's weathered face creased with concern as he took in the collar. Is that what I think it is, a binding collar? You know about it. He looked away, guilt crossing his features. I know many things I should have shared with you long ago. That's why I'm here, not just to rescue you, though I would if you asked, but to tell you the truth. What truth? About your blood, about Alaric's curse, about why I've been protecting you all these years. Morgan stared at him, realization dawning. You knew. All this time you knew what I was. Victor nodded, his expression somber. I knew your mother before she married Samuel. I knew Alaric's mother before the curse. And I know why the witch targeted him. Tell me, Morgan said, settling beside the old soldier. Tell me everything. Victor took a deep breath. It begins as most tragedies do, with love. A love so powerful it twisted into something dark when rejected. Helena the witch loved Alaric's father, but he chose another. In her rage, she didn't curse him directly, she cursed his bloodline. His son would become a monster under the full moon, and each generation after would suffer worse until the bloodline died out entirely. But the prophecy, was a moment of regret, Victor continued. As she lay dying, Helena had a vision. Silver blood and moonlight, a balance to the curse. She told only one person, the old beta who had been kind to her. My father. Morgan felt the ground shift beneath her. Your father, Tia. We've been guardians of the secret for 3 generations, waiting, watching for the one with Mercury blood. When you were born, I knew, but you were too young, and Alaric was still learning to control his curse. I couldn't bring a child into that darkness. So I waited, protected you from afar. By letting me live as an outcast. Morgan's voice held no accusation, only a need to understand. By keeping you safe until you were strong enough, Victor corrected gently. By teaching you what you'd need to survive. By making sure no one knew what you truly were, a key to one of the most powerful alphas in the country. He reached for her hand. You've learned to exist, Morgan. Now it's time to learn how to live. The moon rose like an accusation that night, impossibly large and bright, against the black canvas of the sky. Morgan stood at the window of the preparation chamber, feeling its pull like a physical force. The collar at her throat pulsed in rhythm, with her heartbeat growing warmer as moonlight touched her skin. Behind her, Victor and Alaric spoke in low voices, finalizing preparations that felt increasingly futile as the hour approached. Logan stood guard at the door, his weathered face set in grim lines. There was no fear in the old beta, only resignation, as if he had witnessed this scene too many times to maintain hope. It's time, Alaric said, finally, his voice strained. Morgan turned to find him already beginning to change, his eyes shifting between human blue and feral gold, his fingers elongating into the beginning of claws. Victor approached her, placing his hands on her shoulders. Remember everything I taught you, he said. Knowledge is your weapon, patience your shield. What if I fail? Morgan whispered, voicing the fear she'd kept buried. Victor's smile held a lifetime of hard-won wisdom. Then you'll have died trying to matter. There are worse epitaphs. Alaric led them through passages that descended deep into the mountain's heart to a chamber Morgan hadn't seen before. Unlike the refined architecture of the upper fortress, this place was primal, a cavern with walls of raw stone reinforced with bands of metal and inscribed with runes that glowed with suppressed power. My containment room, Alaric explained, voice already roughening as the transformation progressed. Once the door closes, nothing gets in or out until dawn, unless I will it. Or until you break through it, Logan added grimly. Last full moon you nearly did. Alaric nodded, then turned to Victor. If this fails, if she dies, get the other tributes to safety. There's gold in my private vault, enough to establish them elsewhere. Victor nodded. And you, if she dies, there's nothing left to save. The simplicity of the statement struck Morgan like a physical blow. This wasn't just about survival anymore. This was about redemption for both of them. Alaric turned to Morgan, his features already beginning to shift. Last chance to change your mind. Morgan touched the collar at her throat, feeling it pulse with her blood-silver magic. We're past that point. His hand brushed her cheek, a fleeting touch, filled with everything they couldn't say. Then let's begin. As Logan sealed the heavy door behind them, Morgan took stock of the chamber. Chains hung from reinforced anchors in the walls and ceiling, thick enough to hold a bear, but showing signs of stress and repair. Claw marks scored the stone floor, some shallow, some deep enough to suggest the creature that made them had been trying to dig through the mountain itself. The chains won't hold me, Alaric said, following her gaze. They never do, but they might slow me long enough for you to. He left the sentence unfinished. For me to what? Morgan asked. You never actually explained what I'm supposed to do. Alaric's laugh was pained as another wave of transformation rippled through him. That's because I don't know. The prophecy says the moon's mistake will bring peace to the beast. How that happens? He shrugged. I was hoping for divine inspiration. Comforting, Morgan muttered. Alaric moved to the center of the room where a stone platform stood surrounded by the most heavily reinforced chains. He began securing them around his limbs, wincing as the silver alloy links touched his skin. Once it starts, he said, working quickly, I won't be able to speak. Not as myself. The thing that takes over it might use my voice, but it won't be me. Remember that. Morgan helped him with the final restraints, her fingers brushing his. Even that small contact sent a jolt through her body, a reminder of how new touch still was after decades of isolation. I don't want to hurt you, Alaric said, his voice breaking, but I will. He will. I know, Morgan replied simply. When the final chain was secured, Alaric nodded toward a small alcove carved into the far wall. Wait there until it's over. The space is too small for my transformed state to reach you. Morgan looked at the cramped shelter, then back at Alaric. And how am I supposed to anchor you if I'm hiding? Morgan, his voice was desperate now, as another spasm racked his body. Please, I've seen what happens to those who try to intervene. There won't be enough left of you to bury. She approached him, standing just beyond his reach. That was before me. Before this. She touched the collar. Before we knew what my blood could do. The moon reached its apex, its light filtering through a small aperture in the ceiling, creating a perfect circle of silver illumination around Alaric. The transformation accelerated no longer the controlled shift Morgan had witnessed in the arena, but something violent and primal. His bones broke with audible snaps, reforming into impossible configurations. His skin split like overripe fruit, revealing something underneath that wasn't quite flesh, wasn't quite shadow. The sound he made wasn't a scream so much as the tearing of reality itself. Morgan backed away as the creature took shape larger than the dire wolf form she'd seen before, more monstrous. It stood nearly 15 feet tall on legs that bent in too many places. Its fur wasn't white, but the absence of color, as if it devoured light, and its eyes were holes in reality darker than the space between stars. The chains strained as it tested them, muscles rippling beneath that nightmare pelt. It raised its muzzle to the moonlight and howled a sound so ancient and terrible that Morgan felt it in her bones and her blood, as if some part of her recognized the call. The collar at her throat flared hot, responding to the beast's presence. Morgan touched it, feeling the runes pulse beneath her fingers. This was what it had been created for, this moment, this confrontation between silver blood and shadow beast. The creature's head swiveled toward her, and Morgan felt its attention like a physical weight. There was no recognition there, no spark of the man who had touched her with such gentleness. This was hunger given form, madness made manifest. The beast's lunged chains snapping like thread. Morgan didn't dodge, couldn't have, even if she tried. But the collar flared and the beast's claws stopped, as if hitting an invisible wall inches from her throat. The creature snarled, circling her, testing. Each time it lunged, the collar repelled it, but Morgan could feel the strain. The metal grew so cold it burned, and frost began to form on her skin. "Alaric," she said, her voice barely steady, "I know you are in there." The beast's only response was to attack more viciously. Its claws left gouges in the stone floor. Its howls shattered the crystal lights, plunging them into darkness, lit only by the moonlight and the collar's desperate glow. This wasn't working. The collar could protect her, but it couldn't reach him. She was just another obstacle, another thing to destroy once it figured out how to break through the barrier. Morgan's mind raced through everything she'd learned, the stories Victor had shared, the nature of curses, the way her blood inverted everything it touched. And suddenly, horribly, she understood what needed to happen. The collar wasn't meant to protect her. It was meant to channel her. She whispered, the realization hitting like a physical blow. "Oh, you clever, manipulative bastard." He'd known. Of course he'd known. All his talk of her surviving the night had been misdirection. The collar would keep her alive just long enough to do what needed to be done. The beast paused in its assault head, tilting as if sensing her shift in understanding. In that moment of stillness, Morgan saw past the monster to the curse itself, a writhing mass of shadow and moonlight wrapped around what remained of Alaric's soul. The witch hadn't just transformed him. She'd infected him with a piece of primal chaos. To break it, Morgan would need to do more than survive. She'd need to let it in. Her hands shook as she reached for the clasp of the collar. Every survival instinct rebelled. 20 years of isolation had taught her to protect herself above all else. Never let anyone close. Never risk the poison touch. Never ever lower her defenses. But what was the point of surviving if it meant watching the only person who'd ever truly seen her disappear into madness? "You want to know a secret?" she said to the beast, her fingers finding the collar's release. "I've been dying since the day I was born. Every breath, every heartbeat, every moment of consciousness is just borrowed time before the inevitable. We're all cursed to die. The only choice is whether we do it alone." The beast's eyes fixed on hers, and for just a second, Morgan thought she saw a flicker of blue in the darkness. "I choose not to be alone," she said, and released the collar. It fell away like discarded armor, and immediately the beast lunged. This time, nothing stopped it. Claws designed to rend reality pierced Morgan's skin, and her mercury blood sprayed across the chamber floor. The pain was indescribable, not just physical, but existential, as if her very essence was being unraveled. But her blood touched the beast, and everything changed. Where silver met shadow, light exploded. The creature reeled back, howling, as her blood burned through its form like acid through paper. But this wasn't destruction, it was revelation. Each drop stripped away layers of curse, revealing the man trapped beneath. The beast thrashed, caught between forms. One moment it was the nightmarish wolf, the next something closer to Alaric, then back again. It charged Morgan repeatedly, each attack drawing more blood, each contact burning away more of the witch's poison. Morgan fell to her knees, the world spinning as blood loss took its toll, but she could see it working. The shadow stuff of the curse was dissolving, unable to maintain its hold against the touch of liquid moonlight. "More," she gasped, understanding flooding through her. "You need more." With the last of her strength, she did something suicidal and necessary. She bit down on her own wrist, opening veins properly, letting quicksilver blood flow freely. The beast, maddened by pain and transformation, lunged one final time. Its fangs found her throat, and Morgan let them. Mercury blood flooded its mouth, poured down its throat, worked into its system from the inside. The creature convulsed its form, flickering like a candle in a hurricane. Morgan felt her life draining away, vision darkening at the edges. But she held on. If she was going to die, she'd make it count. The chamber filled with impossible light as 20 years of curse met 20 years of poison and canceled each other out. The last thing Morgan saw before darkness claimed her was Alaric, human, whole, covered in her silver blood, but unmarked by it, catching her as she fell. Morgan, he was saying, his voice cracking. No, 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 this isn't how it ends. You promised me a chance. You promised. But promises, Morgan thought as consciousness faded, were just stories we told ourselves about the future. And sometimes the best stories were the ones where the monster became a man, even if the storyteller had to close the book to make it happen. At least she wouldn't die alone. At least she'd finally touch someone without killing them. At least in the end, she'd mattered. Morgan woke to silver tears falling on her face. Not tears, she realized slowly. Blood. Mercury drops dripping from somewhere above her, each one burning with a cold fire as it touched her skin. Her throat ached with a pain that went beyond physical. And when she tried to speak, only a whistle of air emerged. Don't. Alaric's voice rough with exhaustion and grief. Don't try to talk. Your throat. I almost... Gods, Morgan, I almost killed you. Her eyes focused slowly. They were still in the containment chamber, though dawn light filtered through the aperture in the ceiling. Alaric knelt beside her, cradling her head in his lap. His white hair was stained with quicksilver, his hands covered in her blood. But more importantly, he was human. Completely, utterly human with no trace of the beast. Morgan tried to smile to show him it was worth it, but the movement sent fire through her neck. His hand immediately went to the wound and she saw him flinch. The healers can't touch you, he said quietly. Your blood, even diluted, even mostly drained, still burns them. He held up his hand, showing her the cuts. I've been bleeding into you, drop by drop, my blood to replace what you lost. It's the only thing keeping you alive. Morgan wanted to tell him it was poetic. The monster's blood saving the poison girl. But her voice was gone, perhaps forever. The beast's fangs had torn through more than flesh. The curse is broken, Alaric continued as if needing to fill the silence. Completely, I can feel it. The absence where it lived for so long. His voice broke. You did it. You actually did it. But the cost. Footsteps echoed in the chamber. Logan appeared with Victor close behind both men, stopping short at the sight before them. Your Majesty, Logan said carefully, the fortress is in chaos. Rumors are spreading about what happened. Some say the Omega is dead. Others claim she's transformed into something else. Tell them, Alaric said, not looking away from Morgan, that the tributes are canceled permanently. Any pack that has issue with that can take it up with me personally. His voice hardened. And tell them that the Omega saved their worthless lives. Anyone who speaks against her will find out exactly what kind of monster I can be without a curse. After they left, Alaric gathered Morgan carefully in his arms. The journey through the castle was a blur of concerned faces and hurried whispers. Servants scattered, nobles stared, and through it all, Alaric carried her like something precious and breakable. His chambers were sparse, practical. He laid her on his bed, then began the slow work of changing her bandages. His hands were gentle but unpracticed. I've never actually tended wounds before, he admitted. Always had healers for that. But I'm learning. For you, I'm learning. Days passed in a haze of pain and slowly returning strength. Alaric never left her side, feeding her broth when she could manage it, reading to her from his mother's books when the pain kept her awake. He slept in a chair beside the bed, her hand in his. But as her body healed, a horrible truth became clear. Her voice wasn't returning. The beast's fangs had destroyed something essential. Morgan could breathe, could swallow with difficulty, but speech was beyond her. We'll find a way, Alaric insisted when the diagnosis came. There are specialists in the Eastern Territories. Magical procedures, ancient remedies. I'll tear apart the world to give you back your voice. Morgan touched his face, trying to convey what she couldn't say, that it was enough that she'd made her choice with open eyes, that a voice was a small price for his freedom. But she could see it eating at him, guilt mixed with the cruel irony that she'd saved him with knowledge she could no longer share. A week after the full moon, Alaric made an announcement that shook the kingdom. He stood before his court with Morgan at his side, her throat still wrapped in silver-stained bandages. Let it be known, he declared, that Morgan Hayes of Silver Oak has achieved what no other could. She has broken the curse that plagued your king. In recognition of this service, I name her royal chronicler, with all the rights and protections of that office. The court erupted in whispers. An Omega holding a royal position was unprecedented. An afflicted Omega who couldn't even speak unthinkable. Furthermore, Alaric continued, any who question her worth will answer to me. She sacrificed her voice to save your lives. The least you can offer in return is respect. But respect, Morgan learned, was harder to grant than fear. The nobles bowed when required, but whispered poison when they thought she couldn't hear. The servants remained terrified of her blood. And worst of all, she could see the pity in their eyes. The poisoned Omega who traded one curse for another. That night alone in the chambers she'd been granted as royal chronicler, Morgan sat at her desk and tried to write, but the words wouldn't come. Without her voice to test their rhythm, without the ability to share them aloud, the stories felt trapped inside her. For the first time since that night in the chamber, she wondered if she'd made a mistake. She'd saved Alaric, yes, but what was she now? A voiceless storyteller, a chronicler who couldn't chronicle Alaric, found her there, hours later, surrounded by crumpled attempts at writing, silver tears streaming down her face. This isn't the ending I wanted for you, he said quietly, gathering her into his arms. Morgan pulled away from his embrace and found fresh parchment. If she couldn't speak her stories, she'd write them. Even if her voice was gone, her hand still worked. Slowly, painfully, she began to write. Once upon a time, there was a girl who traded her voice for love. But unlike the stories, she knew the price when she paid it. And unlike the stories, she'd do it again. Alaric read over her shoulder, his arms tightening around her. You're still telling stories, he murmured. Just differently now. Morgan nodded, continuing to write. Different wasn't dead. Changed wasn't broken. She'd spent 20 years learning to find strength in solitude. Now she'd learned to find voice in silence. The moon watched through their window as she wrote. And for the first time since waking voiceless, Morgan felt something like hope. Stories had saved them once. Perhaps they could save them again. The summons came at dawn, delivered by guards who wouldn't meet Morgan's eyes. The Council of Alphas had convened a gathering that hadn't occurred in a decade, and they demanded her presence. Alaric stood before his mirror, adjusting the formal regalia he despised. They have no authority here, he said, his reflection meeting Morgan's eyes. I could refuse them. Morgan shook her head, touching the summons. They both knew what this was about. Word had spread through the kingdoms of how the curse was broken of the Omega who bled quicksilver and the king who drank it. Some called it a miracle. Others whispered darker words. Abomination, blood magic, crimes against nature. You don't have to do this, Alaric said, turning to face her. Let me handle them. But Morgan was already reaching for her formal robes, silver-threaded black, that marked her position as royal chronicler. If they wanted to put her on trial, she'd face them with what dignity she had left. The great hall had been transformed into a courtroom. 5 alpha thrones arranged in a semicircle, each occupied by leaders of the major packs. At the center sat Alpha Eleanor of the Northern Territories, ancient and sharp-eyed, her white hair braided with bones. The gallery overflowed with spectators. Morgan saw her family among them. Beta Samuel stood stiff and uncomfortable, avoiding her gaze. Her mother wept silently. Her siblings whispered behind raised hands. Only Ethan watched her with something like understanding. Morgan of Silver Oak, Alpha Eleanor's voice cut through the murmur like a blade. You stand accused of blood corruption, unnatural practices, and the defilement of an alpha bloodline. How do you answer? Morgan opened her mouth from habit, then closed it. Alaric stepped forward, but Eleanor raised a hand. The accused must answer for herself. If she cannot speak, perhaps she can write. A scribe hurried forward with parchment and ink. Not silver ink, Morgan noticed the deliberate insult. Plain black ink for the Omega who thought herself special. Morgan wrote carefully. I answer that I saved the Alpha King from a curse that would have destroyed him and countless innocents. I regret nothing. Eleanor read it aloud, her tone making the words sound like condemnation. Pride as well as corruption. Tell us, Omega, do you deny drinking the Alpha King's blood, Morgan wrote, to save my life after sacrificing it for his? And do you deny that he consumed yours, to break a curse that threatened the realm? Unnatural, one of the other Alphas spat. Omega blood should never enter an Alpha. It disrupts the natural order. The crowd murmured agreement. Morgan saw her father nod, her mother look away. Show them, Eleanor commanded. Show us all what you've become. Morgan knew what she wanted. Slowly, she drew her ceremonial knife and cut her palm. Silver blood welled up and the crowd gasped. Several wolves near the front scrambled back. Poison, someone whispered. She bleeds poison, and yet the Alpha King lives. Alaric interjected, stepping beside Morgan. I've touched her blood, tasted it, been bathed in it. I stand before you unchanged, except for the breaking of my curse. How do you explain that? Perhaps Alpha Grimner of the Eastern Pact suggested coldly, because you were already corrupted. The witch's curse had already made you unnatural, two wrongs converging. Or perhaps, Alaric countered, because her blood isn't poison at all. It's medicine. It just happens to be medicine too strong for those who don't need it. You speak of medicine, Eleanor laughed harshly. She killed 3 healers who tried to tend her as a child. Her touch withers plants. Her blood burns through living flesh. That's not medicine. That's death incarnate. Morgan wrote furiously, I killed no one intentionally. My affliction was not chosen, merely born. How many has the Alpha King killed? How many have all of you, yet you judge me for blood I cannot change? But Eleanor wasn't finished. Bring forth the witness. Morgan's heart sank as they led in Elder Thomas the healer, who discovered her condition. He looked older, grayer, but his eyes held the same disgust. Tell the court about the prophecy, Eleanor instructed. Thomas cleared his throat. When the Omega's blood first revealed itself, I consulted the old texts. There was a prophecy ancient and nearly forgotten. When silver blood runs in Omega veins, the natural order shall be broken. The weak shall poison the strong, the cursed shall corrupt the pure, and the moon herself shall weep for what her children have become. The crowd erupted. Morgan heard calls for her execution for purification by fire. Alaric moved closer, his body tense with barely contained violence. Morgan wrote desperately, prophecies can be interpreted many ways. Perhaps the natural order needed breaking. Perhaps strength and weakness aren't what we thought. Silence, Eleanor commanded, though Morgan hadn't spoken. The evidence is clear. You are an anomaly, a mistake that should have been corrected at birth. Your continued existence threatens the stability of pack hierarchy. She stood and the other alphas followed. It is the judgment of this council that you be stripped of all rank and position. You will be branded with the mark of the cursed and exiled beyond packlands. No, Alaric said, his voice deadly quiet. You forget this is my kingdom, my hall, my mate. You have no authority here. You're claiming her as mate, Alpha Grimnar scoffed. You haven't marked her. She bears no claiming bite. I haven't marked her because her blood would kill me if I tried, Alaric snarled. But she is mine in every way that matters. Morgan touched his arm, stopping him. The crowd watched as she wrote one final message, holding it up for all to see. I offer a different trial. Let any alpha here touch my blood and survive. If even one can withstand what Alaric has endured, I'll accept your judgment. But if none can, then accept that perhaps your precious natural order has already changed. The hall went silent. Morgan cut her palm deeper, letting mercury blood pool in her cupped hand. She walked to each alpha in turn, offering them the challenge. None would touch it. As I thought, Alaric said into the silence. You condemn what you fear because you're too weak to understand it. Morgan's blood responds to need. I needed to be free of my curse. It freed me. I needed to live. It saved me. It's not poison. It's potential. Morgan returned to the center, her blood still pooling, and did something that shocked even Alaric. She raised her palm to her lips and drank. The effect was gradual but undeniable. The constant ache in her throat, which had been slowly healing over the past weeks with the help of her blood's regenerative properties, eased further. The scar tissue that had been forming began to reshape itself, and deep in her chest, something long dormant stirred to life. When Morgan opened her mouth, a single word emerged. Raw, painful, but undeniably real. Choose. The first word she'd spoken since the chamber. It scraped like glass, but it was hers. Choose. She repeated, her voice gaining strength, though still rough. Fear or evolution. The crowd erupted into chaos, but Morgan saw something new in their eyes. Not just fear now, but awe. The Omega who drank her own poison and spoke with a voice of silver and shadow.